have always been for lowering the voting age to 16. I think it's really important to capture kids when they're in high school, when they're interested in all of this, when they're learning about government, to be able to vote.
Should 16 and 17-year-olds be allowed to vote? D.C. City Council is now considering that question. Legislation was introduced today.
By the next presidential election in 2020, we could see 16 and 17-year-olds voting. Supporters of this measure tell me they have 7 out of 13, a majority of D.C. Council members, supporting the measure.
I think people are getting excited about this, especially with what's going on in the nation in terms of youth leading social change. So I think that people are going to be very excited about it and want to get on board.
The legislation introduced today by D.C. Council member Charles Allen. He was inspired by the high schoolers we saw last month at the March for Our Lives campaigning for gun control. Now these young people here in D.C. are working on getting the vote for 16 and 17-year-olds.
Children are the future. Just make sure they don't have a say in it. The mobilized students of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High have inspired the entire country. And while we wait on legislators to pass meaningful gun control, why not pass something else in the meantime to show these students that we care about them and their concerns, like lowering the voting age? Here's why 16-year-olds voting could be good for democracy.
It really matters to me when funding for parks gets changed. It really matters to me when the minimum wage gets changed, and that affects my community.
100 years ago, when those people who resisted the women's vote were coming out with exactly those arguments of immaturity and disinterest, and that women wouldn't know what they were talking about. Will the honourable member not agree that those people who were resisting to enlarge the franchise were wrong, and those who were persistently making the case for extending the franchise to women were right, and this is exactly a similar argument?
Letting 16-year-olds vote in the Scottish referendum could sway the argument south of the border. Ed Miliband was sufficiently impressed.
It's time to hear the voice of young people in our politics. So we will give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds in general elections.
Is that what you vote for affects the rest of your life? And there's more rest of your life for 16 and 17-year-olds than there is, for instance, for someone who is 88.
The British Youth Council has published a new report pushing for the voting age to be lowered to 16. The initiative at Westminster this evening echoes Sky News' Stand Up Be Counted campaign for greater political engagement among 16 to 25-year-olds.
I think it's really heightened my ambitions and everyone else's. It's shown that when 16-year-olds are given that opportunity, they engage and they get involved and they really use the opportunity well.
There's some radical reforms on the table.
Online voting by 2020.
Mandatory voting.
Being able to register down to the wire, even on election day.
And votes for 16 and 17-year-olds.
Do you agree? He thinks that 16 and 17-year-olds don't have enough experience to vote in the referendum. Do you agree? I'll just go straight round the panel, yes or no?
No. I think they should vote.
Yes.
Quick answer,
yes, 16-year-olds can vote because you can be taxed. If you leave school, you can have a job and you could be taxed. Now, there's the old no taxation without representation. You should be able to vote when you're going to be paying tax in a world which expects you to be acting like an adult.
I support 16.
I think behind the question, do you support, would you like a universal franchise for 16 and 17-year-olds?
I support 16 and 17-year-olds having a vote, not just in the referendum, but every election campaign. I'm delighted that 60% of people in that poll last week said they would vote and stay part of the referendum. But the important point...
should 16 and 17-year-olds be able to vote in the referendum? Yes, we proposed it. I think it should not just for the referendum. I think it should be for all elections. We need to connect and reconnect the young, especially with the democratic process. This is a good way of doing it.
OK.
They organize protests, they gather for walkouts, they skip school, all for the sake of expressing their political views. Teenagers in Washington, D.C. want to be heard and want to be given the right to vote at 16 instead of 18.
So everybody thinks 16-year-olds are stupid, but no 16-year-old is going to vote for Donald Duck in office. That's not going to happen. Like, no one is. And we're not children. If 18 is the age of majority, then 16-year-old is only 2 years younger than that, so we're young adults, and we should be treated as such.
By lowering the voting age from 18 to 16 years of age, my amendment will allow young people to have a say in our federal elections, to help shape and inform the policies that will set the course for the future. From gun violence to climate change, our young people are organizing, mobilizing, and calling us to action. They're at the forefront of social and legislative movements and have earned inclusion in our democracy.
This is why I'm proud to have introduced a constitutional amendment in the 115th and the 116th Congress to lower the voting age to 16 for federal, state, and local elections. The amendment in front of us today gives 16-year-olds the right to vote in federal elections.
And I want to read the tweet from Harvard professor Lawrence Tribe. He writes, teens between 14 and 16 have far better BS detectors on average than adults 18 and older. Wouldn't it be great if the voting age were lowered to 16? Just a pipe dream, I know, but...
I think 16 and 17-year-olds should be able to vote in this country, period. I don't think they should be allowed to vote for some races but not the other. I think that voting's not a half measure. You either believe people can vote or you don't, and I believe that they should. So I want people to vote up and down the ticket.
Some people do make an argument that they think that 16 and 17-year-olds aren't mature enough to vote.
When I introduced the bill 2 years ago, I didn't have a whole lot of support at the time, and there were a few people who, I think, chuckled at the idea of 16 and 17-year-olds, and their arguments were exactly that. How do I know a 16 and 17-year-old has life experience? How do I know that they can be informed? How do I know they can make decisions?
I think if you spend some time with youth, you tend to know better.
I feel like the youth in DC, a lot of us are aware of the changes that has happened in our communities. Like, I am a Ward 5, born and raised. I'm informed. Me and my friends and everyone, we talk about the different things that are affecting us.
When I sit down and we talk to a lot of the youth across the city, the issues that they give are so similar to the issues that 20-year-olds are going to give, that 30-year-olds, that 40-year-olds, that like even 60-year-olds might give. And that's gentrification. Issues like affordable housing, education, jobs, and then just like violence.
Who is more informed about what's going on in school than the students?